Hello and welcome back to the Sam Wardrop Show. I've not done one of these in ages because some of you will know I was away travelling. So I was away for 10 weeks in South America, and that is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about my trip, why I did it, why I think you should do it, some of the stories, and of course I'm going to talk to you today and tell you about the Stalker Story from Brazil. Very, very weird. But before I do that, thank you to G4 Claims. They've just built this brand new studio. Some of you will remember that the older studio was kind of darker. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. If you're listening to this on podcast, you will not be able to see what I'm talking about. So if you want to check the studio out, jump over to YouTube and give this a watch as well. So shout out to G4 Claims. Thank you very much. As always, supply me with beautiful studio, beautiful equipment, and some drinks. And I need to plug the biggest sponsor of the podcast, the pre-season program and the player program. There isn't a whole load of sponsors for this podcast, which is why I need to plug my own stuff, because when players come on board, when players buy this stuff, I'm able to do more of the stuff that I do, like the podcast, like YouTube, and like TikTok, Instagram videos, all that kind of stuff. But that's beside the point. I'm going to keep this podcast episode like 20 to 30 minutes long, and I'm also going to do two more. I'm going to do a couple of kind of just individual ones where I think I'll share some stories and also things that I think will be useful for players. And I'm not really sure how to sit. I think maybe here. Maybe I'll sit up when there's like really good bits of the podcast of the stories and stuff. I'll sit up a little bit more, but I'm quite enjoying this relaxed position here. Again, sorry if you're watching. Sorry if you're listening on Spotify and you can't see me. So I want to talk to you about my travelling story, travelling solo, why I did it, and everything in between. So I went on the 4th of February, I left to go to Rio for 4 weeks, Rio de Janeiro, and I stayed in a place called Gloria. I then went to Ilha Grande, which was a small island off the coast. I then went up to the Amazon rainforest, and I stayed just off the Rio Negro. I then went all the way down to Falls de Iguazu, which is like on the border of Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. I then flew to Porto Alegre, which is a pretty big city, 5 million people in Brazil. I then flew to Florianópolis, which is another kind of beach town in Brazil. I then moved country to Peru. I went to Cusco to do the Inca Trail, came back to Rio. I wanted to finish my trip in Rio because I love Rio so much. I went to a small town called Paraty, which was really nice, but it was the scariest. It was the only time I felt a little bit unsafe. And then I finished back up in Rio, Ipanema, on Ipanema Beach beside Copacabana. But before we get into all that, it's time for the Stalker Story. So, the Stalker Story, I was going to tell this later, but I'm going to tell it now. So basically, this was about 5 weeks into my trip. And I'd flown from Porto Alegre, the city, and I flew into Florianópolis, which is like a beach town. Now, this was the first time that I was travelling completely solo. So for the 5 weeks previous, I'd been with friends and people that I'd met during my first couple of weeks. So I landed in Florianópolis, really looking forward to it because it's meant to be a really nice kind of cool surf beach town. Get the taxi to my hostel, arrived there really late, so I just went straight to bed. And for these few days I was kind of keeping myself to myself. Well, I thought I was going to be keeping myself to myself, but then it turns out I had 3 or 4 friends that I'd met in Rio who were staying in a hostel across the street, which was good news because I like these people. But anyway, day 1, okay, go out, off to the beach during the day, chilling, enjoying myself, taking in the sights, went for a little jog along the beach, and that evening I was meeting my friends, and it was that evening I was meeting them for dinner, okay, so I go down to the bar, there's like a kind of outdoor pool area and bar, and it's like 5-6 p.m, it's dark because sunset's early, and I was like, you know what, I'll take a beer before I go and meet them. So I had 15 minutes, so I go up to the bar and I'm waiting in the line, I'm waiting in the queue for the bar, and I kind of feel I sense this person just standing like not behind me, not beside me, but like in between. And I kind of turn around and I see this girl and I said hi, and then I say, oh, can I get this beer to the barman? And she says, oh, no, don't take that one. Take this one, it's really good. So I was like, okay, I'll take this one. And before I go any further, actually, she might even be watching this or listening to this, which would suggest She has a stalker. I'm not naming names, okay? So this person stays anonymous, just in case they find me and they come after me. I'm only joking. So I get the drink, and then she's still kind of standing pretty close. So I was like, you know what? Do you want a beer? She was like, yeah, I'll take a beer. So she takes a beer. We sit down and chatting away. I was like, only got 10 or 15 minutes. And within that 10 or 15 minutes, she tells me her life story. And by the end of the conversation, she asks if she can meet me the next day for a meeting. That was the initial alarm bell. So I was thinking, why? Why would someone want to meet me for a meeting? This was after I told her I was kind of doing coaching and stuff. So went out, met my pals, forgot about it. And the next day I was like, I came down about midday and I saw her out in the garden. In fact, no, you know what? It turns out, actually, before I go any further, that she didn't stay in the hostel. She lived outside the hostel. She's a Brazilian person, and she came there and hung out. But she told me they usually kick her out at 12 p.m, right? They usually kick her out at midnight. So the next day I came down at midday. She's already there. I was like, bloody hell. This person gone home. See her outside in the kind of pool, but again, just chatting to people. And I was like, fuck this. Like, I'm leaving for the full day. So I go out, spend the full day. I think I was sand surfing, is that what it's called? I was sand surfing that day. Came back and she was still there. This is like 5 or 6 p.m. I was like, my God. So I kind of stayed inside, hid away. And then I got I was up in my room. I was drinking a beer and I got a text saying, Sam, do you want to come and watch us get tattoos? The people that I knew across the street were off to get tattoos. And that is where I got my first tattoo. This is the evening I got my first tattoo. I was like, yeah. So I jump out with them, get a tattoo, which is my first ever tattoo. My grandfather's year of birth, 1931, really nice. And I come back at 11:45 and I'm thinking, she went out for dinner, had a few drinks, came back at 11:45 and I'm thinking she has to be gone. It's almost her cut-off time. Arrive back and I see her still out in the pool bar, but I'm like, no way. How is she still here? So I go into the kitchen, the lights are off and I'm filling up my water and I just hear, hey Sam. Turn around, she's standing in the door looking at me. I was like, no way. How? Why? How did you see me? And why are you back in here? So I end up chatting to her again, and then I was like, you know what, I'm really tired. But she'd seen on my Instagram stories that I was going to Peru to do the Inca Trail the next day. So she goes, oh, by the way, I was thinking of going to Peru at the end of April. This is like end of March, right? So I'm like, whatever. I was like, no, I'm going tomorrow. She's like, oh, I'd love to come. I was like, well, my flight's booked, I'm doing the Inca Trail, everything's already organised. And she was like, that's a shame. I was like, yeah, that is a shame. And in the meantime, she'd been sending me loads of messages on Instagram, but I hadn't opened them and I hadn't followed her back, so I was just like, not sure about this person. So I was like, right, you know what, I'm tired, I've got an early flight tomorrow, heading over to Peru. I go off to sleep and wake up the next day and I'm heading to Florianopolis Airport, and I'm actually flying to Sao Paulo, and then the day after I'm flying to Cusco. So I arrive at Florianopolis Airport, I get a text saying, by the way, hey, I've decided to fly today, I'm coming to Peru. And I was thinking, what? Why? And you're not coming with me. So again, I just patch the messages, I don't open them, and I jump in the flight to Sao Paulo, and I'm thinking, you know what, I'll lose her because I'm not actually flying today, I'm flying tomorrow. So I'll get to Sao Paulo, stay the night in Sao Paulo. Next morning I'm up and jump on my first flight to Lima. So I go from Sao Paulo to Lima. And arrive in Lima and I need to change, like do a transfer in the airport. So I have to actually get my bag from the baggage reclaim and then check back in for my flight to Cusco. So come off the plane, it's like delayed and I'm like, shit, I'm going to miss my connecting flight. Waiting for my bags and I'm getting flustered. So I've flown from Sao Paulo all the way to a different country, Peru. It's like a 6-hour flight. Okay, and I'm standing at the baggage reclaim. I get a tap on the shoulder. Turn around and she's standing right behind me. And I'm looking at her, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my God, like how? What the fuck is going on? How? Why? And I'm sitting thinking, see, if anyone could see this right now, they'd be like, what the hell was going on? So I didn't even know what to say. I just kind of turned back round and she was like standing beside me chatting away, and I was like, oh my God, this is actually a bit fucking messed up. And she's like, I'm going to Cusco, but I think we're going to miss our connecting flight. I'm like, our connecting flight? We're not together. We're not together here. So transpires that there's actually loads of flights that go to Cusco from Lima, and thank God, but I managed to get a different flight from her to Cusco, and I never saw her again. But then after a couple of days, I had to block her on socials because she was just inundating me with messages. So that's the stalker story. So I thought we would kick it off with that. Anyway, that wasn't the best bit about going away. So in terms of traveling solo, like I had a few questions and stuff from people saying kind of like, how did you find it going solo? Would you not have wanted to go with other people? And for me, I wanted to go by myself because I knew I would be able to do whatever I wanted. I feel like if you go with other people, like friends, family, partner, you have to compromise with them. And for me, I was like, I don't really want to. I want to go out and experience this completely by myself, make decisions, do things that I want to do. So that was the reason I went by myself. But I also knew deep down that I was going to meet people there because one, I was staying in hostels, and two, the first 3 or 4 weeks that I was there, or the first 4 weeks I was there, I was doing a volunteer program with an organisation called International Volunteer HQ, which this isn't a shout out or anything, but well, it is a shout out, but they're not paying me or anything. But if you want to do travelling, I would go with them. They were really good, really organised, really efficient, brilliant communication. And funnily enough, one of my mates has actually decided to go and book a trip with them in summer to Kenya. So check them out if you've ever wanted to do it. There's loads of different price ranges and options as well, which is good. In terms of the ages of people there, I would say it ranged from 18 was the youngest, which was pretty young. There wasn't many 18-year-olds, all the way through to, I mean, there was people in their 40s, 50s, 60s in the hostel, but generally the kind of average age was between 18 and 30. That was the majority of people. So if you're listening to this, you're probably in that age bracket. So I would say you're never too old, you're never too young to go. And what you find as well is a lot of the people that are there are very, very similar. Like everyone's very like-minded. So you find that people are traveling for the same reasons. So obviously my reason was similar to other people's in that it was essentially a bit of a career break, a change in direction. Maybe they were doing something they didn't really like and they just thought, you know what, I'm not going to do it anymore, and they move on. But I split the traveller into 3 categories. So first category was the young traveller who was coming out of uni or who was taking a gap year. Okay, that was probably the first type. The second type was those that were taking like a career break. So maybe they were in between jobs. They had 6 months or a year between contracts. Maybe there was people taking a rethink as well. So they'd maybe saved up a bit of cash, stopped working for 6 months or a year, and were traveling South America. And then the third category was what I call the proper traveller. So these people were living on the bare minimum. They were the people that brought like one t-shirt, one towel, one pair of pants, one pair of socks, and I'm only joking, not quite. But essentially these people would work for a few months somewhere in the world, and then they would use the next 3 or 4 months to travel. And that was like, to me, that was like the proper traveller type. So those are the kind of 3 categories I would say. There's probably other categories, but that's the ones that I kind of saw. And the reason I went, I would put myself into the kind of career break / rethink category, but also I've always wanted to travel. I've just never been able to because of football. You know, you don't get any time off really. You're pretty much 52 weeks a year. I was personally, when I was playing football, I was 52 weeks a year because to do my job properly, that's what it was. In terms of nerves and nervousness, I didn't really have any. I was at a point in my life where I really wanted to do it and I was really ready to go and do it. But also, I knew I was going to meet people there, so I wasn't really nervous about it. The only thing I was maybe nervous about was I thought Brazil was maybe, or South America was going to be a little bit more dangerous than it was, but it wasn't at all. The worst thing I probably had before and during was self-doubt, as in like, what the hell am I actually doing? What the hell am I doing in my life? What the hell am I doing here? What about the business that I've got at home, my coaching business? Like, is this actually going to do it any favours? Is it going to be detrimental? And especially at a time where my friends are all starting jobs. They're all starting, like, they've all finished uni, they're all going into their first jobs, starting their careers, and I'm doing the opposite almost. That was the kind of self-doubt and stuff I had. But to be honest with you, I would think about that for maybe once a week, every few weeks, and then it would just go, because I'd be like, you know what, I'm having the time of my life here, and I know what I'm doing back home, I know what I want to do, and I can focus on it when I get home. And I think generally your 20s are a strange age, because you've finished uni, you finished school. For me, I finished, take a break from playing football, and you're probably in a kind of in-between stage where you maybe, some people really know what they're doing, some people think they know what they're doing, some people don't have a clue what they're doing. Me personally, I would say I'm just winging it. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I try and live my life to the kind of values that I kind of try and live a life in line with my values. So that kind of put my mind at ease. And the reason I did it was I've always wanted to. Newfound freedom. I've got my notes here just to help me along. And how did I prepare? Okay, so preparing for traveling was, I started preparing probably back in October, November time. I had to look into getting injections, vaccinations, so I had to get polio and typhoid, I had to get yellow fever, and I already had hepatitis, one of them, I think it was A or B, maybe I had both, and I had to get something else. I can't remember. Rabies, I had to get 3 shots of rabies. So you have to do that in advance, because it takes like sometimes a few weeks for the vaccinations to kick in. So that's the first thing you need to think about. Second thing is save some money. All right, have a budget, have a rough budget, and then go out there and also have like an emergency budget in case you go over your initial budget. So save budget for it. You can do it really, really cheap out there. I didn't do it as cheap as I could have because I wasn't there for that long a period of time. So one of the things that I took the hit on was internal flights rather than buses and overnight buses, because I didn't want to waste days, like 2 or 3 days on a bus. I just wanted to get there. So the flights were pretty expensive. Some of them, in fact, were just as expensive as my return flight from Glasgow to Rio. I took 14 flights by the end of my trip, so they did add up. That was probably my biggest expense. In terms of day-to-day living, you can do it extremely cheap. I made a TikTok video where I lived on a day, food and accommodation for less than 30 quid, which is pretty affordable. I would say learn a bit of the language, just like thank you, hello, how are you, how do I get to, can I order, that kind of thing, just to get you by, especially in South America or in Brazil. Learn a bit of Brazilian Portuguese because not many people speak any English. I watched a couple of YouTube videos as well before I went, just to give me a bit of an idea of what the country was going to be like, give you a bit of context. And a lot of messages I had were like, is it dangerous? And I would say yes. I would say it's extremely dangerous in comparison to the UK, in comparison to Scotland, living in Glasgow. It's pretty wild, but that's in comparison. When I was there wasn't the only moment I felt in danger or scared was when I went to Parachi, but I'll tell you about that later. Rio itself, if you're streetwise, if you're street smart, if you're not an idiot, you're fine, okay? So as long as you're not, I didn't have my watch on the full time. I didn't wear my AirPods out kind of in public until I was down at the beach. I always had my phone zipped away in a pocket or in a money belt with my wallet that was under my t-shirt and my shorts. So that was more so on nights out, because literally I'd be on nights out and you would feel people like brushing past your pockets looking for your phone. Couple of boys lost their phones, but honestly, no issues. I mean, the crazy thing is, you walk into some of the favelas and there's guys with like guns. I don't know what kind of guns they are, and like football kits on, and it's just surreal. It almost doesn't even, you don't even comprehend that it's actually a real gun because you're just not used to seeing it. You know, the favelas are probably dangerous. A lot of them are pacified. There's some that you can go in either with a guide or by yourself, but you have to be kind of streetwise, street smart, and keep your kind of wits about you, especially at night. But I would say, honestly, I didn't have one issue. I didn't have one issue when I was there. So to me, it was safe. The time I felt unsafe was in Parachi. So basically, this is when I came back from Peru. I wanted to go, this is my final 2 weeks in Brazil. I wanted to go somewhere, chill out, relax, and get back to work. So I decided to go to Parachi, which is like a coastal town. It's meant to be like a really, really cool, really nice, quite upmarket coastal town. And it is. But it transpired on my arrival, they had the worst flood flooding and rain for over 15 years. And it was so severe that there was huge landslides. People actually lost their lives. A lot of the restaurants, cafes were closed. They were all flooded. All the streets were flooded. And I actually couldn't, I tried to leave, but I couldn't get out of Parachi because it was basically obviously on the coast, but to get to it, you had to basically come up and over a pretty big hill. And the roads were completely closed because of landslides. So I had to wait it out 4 days. And eventually I got out and back to Rio, but not by I was meant to take a bus, but the buses were off because they couldn't navigate the road. So we had to get smaller cars because essentially when we were driving back, you were avoiding all the landslides. That was the only time I felt unsafe because I was literally stuck in my room for like 2 or 3 days and it was just pouring. The Wi-Fi didn't really work. The restaurants were all closed. It was just a bit eerie. It was kind of scary. That's the only time I felt unsafe, and that wasn't even from a people point of view. That was like a kind of flooding point of view. I talked to you about my costs. I probably spent between £6,000 and £8,000 in total. But as I said, you could have done it for a lot less. But because I spent a lot of money on internal flights, it cost me a lot more money. I also booked a couple of Airbnbs, which are more expensive. If you stay in hostels, it's obviously cheaper. You could have done it on a lot less budget, but I didn't have that long. So that's the reason I spent that. And why should you? I wrote this question. Why should you go and travel? And for me, it was like, well, what else do I want to really spend my money on? What I've learned over the last few years is experiences are invaluable. And those are the things that stay with you for life. So to me, what I spent on that trip, invaluable. The people I met, the experiences I had, the memories I made, they are with me for life. All right, no one can take them out of this brain. And I had some of the most amazing moments. Even the Stalker Story is a good one, right? But the way I look at it is, you think, oh yeah, but I need to start my career, I need to start my job. And it's like, yeah, but you can still do that when you're 30 or 40. You can go back to whatever job you want to do or whatever job you're doing and do that when you're 30 or 40. But can you still travel like you would in your 20s when you're 30 or 40? I would say no, because there wasn't people there that were doing what the 20-year-olds, people in their 20s were doing. So that's what I would consider. What to look out for, I just wrote this down, like in terms of if anyone's thinking of going. Scammers and pickpocketers. There is pickpockets, but like in any city, in any European country, probably anywhere in the world, there's going to be pickpocketers. People stopping and asking you for things in the street, you just have to ignore them and walk past them because most of the time they're asking for something. And sometimes, you don't know, it could be little scamming traps. And the other one was scammers, so they just prey on tourists. So for example, when we arrived in the jungle in Manaus, well, Manaus is the city, as soon as we got off the plane, it was like all these guys just descended on you trying to sell you jungle excursions and stuff like that. We already had something booked, which was good, but we heard some horror stories where people were like, couples had gone on some excursion in the jungle and had been left in tears because it was just an absolute kind of shambles. Must-dos in Rio. The sunset. Sugarloaf Mountain is basically these two massive rocks that have got restaurants and bars on them, and they're connected through a cable cart. That was one of the most incredible days or evenings I had in Rio, just because it was a clear night. The sunset was spectacular. The views were amazing. So you basically see, if you go up there early enough, you see all of Rio and the kind of bathing in the sun. You then see the sunset, and then you see it in the dark, everything lit up, which was pretty awesome. Sunset, Sugarloaf, Ipanema Beach, which was the nicest beach I thought in Rio. You can surf on it. There was a nice outdoor gym. The best place to go for a night out is a place called Lapa. Lapa. So Lapa it's not like one nightclub, it's essentially one street. And it's like any party place or any party street you've ever been on, but like times 1,000. It was insane. I've never seen so many people in my life. And all the clubs are kind of half inside, half outside. But there's more people on the street dancing and partying than that are in the actual nightclubs, because there's basically small stalls like beer stalls and caipirinha stalls, which is like the kind of local cocktail, all along this road, and they're a lot cheaper. So everyone just hangs about there, drinks away, and you can still hear the music, which was pretty cool. So if you ever go to Lapa, I think we spent too many nights there actually. And also the Inca Trail adventure. That was unreal. Amazon, nice as well, because you've got no phone, similar to the Inca Trail. There is no phone reception, so you're literally off the grid for 4 or 5 days, which is pretty awesome. Favourite bits from Rio? Acai bowls, which is like acai is a fruit, and they mix it up. It's like berries. They mix it up, and you put granola, banana, and whatever you want in it. Strawberries, amazing. There should be more of them here. The beer's pretty cool. It only comes in 600ml bottles, pretty much. So there was no pints. They give you a 600ml bottle, and they put it in a cooler with a tiny little glass. You just pour little glasses and sip away. And of course, the best bit about Rio is the beach. One thing I noticed was like how open Brazilians are, like totally different to people here in terms of just like, so the main thing for me was how people were like getting with each other, right? So guys, couples, guys, girls, doesn't matter what age you were, they would just be like so touchy-feely with each other. The complete opposite to here. Like, for example, you could walk into a park in Rio and there'd be couples in their 20s, 30s, 40s sitting together but like kissing each other, like winching the face off each other, and no one bats an eyelid. Whereas here, I feel like if anyone was doing that, people would be like, what the hell are those two doing? So to me, that was just one of the kind of interesting bits, and that was a topic of conversation we had out there, was just how open people are. Just a very different culture as opposed to here, where everyone's very private and uptight. That's my opinion anyway. But I think it was pretty similar amongst everyone. The Inca Trail beer story. If you watch my Inca Trail YouTube video, you'll have heard about that. But basically, there's these little stalls dotted all the way along the Inca Trail, and there was one final, and it's basically full of drinks and snacks and stuff. And there was one final stall at about 3,600 meters before we reached the highest point. The Dead Women's Pass at 4,200 meters. There was a stall at 3,600 meters, and that was the last one before Machu Picchu, which was like 2 days away. I was like, I need to get something. They had these big Gatorades. This was the peak of my altitude sickness. My head was like throbbing out of my skull, right? It was getting worse and worse because we were obviously getting higher. So I see this stall, I'm like, brilliant, Gatorade. This is 7 a.m, right? So I go over, women's like 15 or 10 souls for a big Gatorade. I was like, give me the big Gatorade. I'm unpacking my money from my bag, and I knock over a beer, an Inca Beer, hits the ground. I mean, it was literally like that much off the floor. Knock it over, hits the ground, the whole thing fucking explodes, right? I was like, shit, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I wonder if she's seen it. Look up, nothing. She's not seen it. I was kind of like, should I tell her? And then straight away, her pal behind the stall was like, look. I was like, fuck. So she's like, just looks at me and goes, 15 soul. I was like, you know what? She was like, maybe in her 60s or 70s, and I was like, listen, you've carried this 3,600 meters up, so I'm not even going to argue. You deserve 15 soul for this can of beer. In the meantime, pay her the money, pick up the can, and I'm like, it's still like half full, and it's called Inca Beer. I'm like, I want to try some. So I crack the can open, and the minute I crack it open, there was like about 20 other people, like from other groups, standing at the same stall, and they all just like turn round and look at me like, what the fuck is this guy drinking a beer at 7 a.m. on the hardest day of the hike? And I was like, no. I was like, no, I'm not actually drinking this beer. As I take a sip, I'm like, I spilled it, and now I wanted to taste it. And now all the people are looking at me, and they're seeing a guy drinking a can of beer at 7 a.m. and also a crazy Scottish guy claiming that he's not drinking a beer at 7 a.m. So, tried the beer, then threw it away. It actually tastes like shit. So, that was the Inca Trail beer story. Got my Gatorade, and it was actually, by the time I got to the top, my headache had settled down because I was taking like paracetamol, Nurofen, and some other tablet by this point that basically stops the headaches. And I wrote down one more story here, which is a funny one. And it's actually about one of my good mates, an Israeli guy who I became pretty good mates with. But the first day I met him, so he was from Israel, right? And he just reminded me of the Zohan so much. I think we'd gone to the beach that day, and he was telling stories, and he had this like long kind of surfer hair. And I've already got the impression of him being the Zohan, just as a bit of a laugh as well, right? So we're sitting on the beach, but 5 or 6 of us sitting in a group chatting away, All of a sudden, 5 lifeguards sprint past us, and we all turn around like, what the hell? Straight away, he jumps up, sprints after him. So the reason he sprints after him is because he just told us that he was a diving instructor. So obviously he's got a good swimming ability. We're looking at the water and there's this woman like essentially drowning with her pal. I was like, fuck, I don't want to watch someone drown. So the Zohan dives in the water and he's overtaking these other lifeguards front crawl. And I'm laughing. We're all killing ourselves laughing like, is this guy real? He must actually be the Zohan. So he goes in and it's like, out of the 5 or 6 lifeguards, one is keeping up with him and the 2 of them reach the woman and like swim her out and obviously save her, and they're all high-fiving each other on the way back up the beach. And I was just killing myself. He sat down and I was like, mate, you are actually the Zohan. But he's a good guy. Shout out to Eyal. Eyal Dives on Instagram if you want to check him out. He's a proper traveller. And that's all I had really for my travelling stories. I'm trying to think if I should add in anything more about the places I went to. The Amazon rainforest, we actually didn't stay on the Amazon River. We stayed just off the Rio Negro River. And I'm not going to lie, it was a pretty luxurious stay for the 4 nights. We were eating like kings. We had a nice not pretty decent beds. We weren't exactly camping out in the jungle, so it was pretty relaxed. The worst bit actually, not the worst bit, because the falls the Iguazu falls were pretty cool to see, but I didn't really like Iguazu itself because I thought it was really touristy, and you had to pay a lot of money to do the excursions there at the falls, and I just thought it was like you were queuing for things, you were on these big buses full of loads of tourists, and I just didn't really like that. So that was probably my least enjoyable place. Apart from that though, everywhere else was unreal. That and Parachi was a bit scary. So that's essentially the South America trip. If you listen to this and you've got any more questions for me, please just send me a DM or just write it in the comments if you watched it on YouTube. And that is the first individual podcast episode wrapped up. I hope it wasn't too boring and you enjoyed it. And the final shout out goes to, as always, the biggest sponsor of this podcast, the player program and the pre-season program. If you're a football player and you need help during this off season, these 2 programs, they're separate programs, right? These will cover everything you need to go back for pre-season in the best shape of your life, but also to continue through the season in the best shape of your life. So if you want to check them out, you can do on samwardrop.com, or again, as always, just drop me a DM. But thank you for listening. First individual podcast episode is a wrap.